In the autumn of 1871, in a remote village on the outskirts of Bangor, Maine, 11-year-old Nathaniel Pierce became the subject of one of the most disturbing medical case studies in American history. He was known by locals as the boy who never slept. For 2,918 consecutive nights, nearly 8 years, Nathaniel's eyes never closed in slumber, a phenomenon that defied every principle of medicine in the 19th century. Dr. Abraham Willard, the region's most respected physician, meticulously documented the boy's relentless wakefulness in a series of leather-bound journals. To casual observers, young Nathaniel appeared normal, a polite, quiet child with ash-blonde hair and a shy smile. But beneath those ever-watchful blue eyes lay a secret that cast a long shadow over the entire community. At first, the idea of a child who never sleeps sounded like a folk tale or a gross exaggeration. Yet, as the years passed, unexplained incidents mounted under the cover of darkness. Livestock found dead without obvious cause, sudden fires that sparked in the dead of night, and neighbors who whispered of strange nocturnal sightings. All these threads seemed to weave around the Pierce boy, the lone soul in town who witnessed every midnight hour. The official records of Nathaniel's condition and the events that followed were quietly sealed by local authorities and tucked away for over a century. Only through Dr. Willard's journals and piecemeal testimonies has the truth slowly emerged. And that truth reveals a darkness in the woods of Maine that challenges everything we thought we knew about the necessity of sleep and the fragile boundaries of the human mind. Before we continue with the haunting story of Nathaniel Pierce and the nightmares that plagued Penobscot County, take a moment to subscribe to our channel. If tales of unsolved mysteries and eerie history intrigue you, hit that notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest secrets. And let us know in the comments where you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of night owls and mystery enthusiasts around the world. Now, make sure your lights are on as we journey back to 1871, where a sleepless boy and a sleepy town would collide in ways no one could have imagined. The events that made Nathaniel Pierce both an object of medical fascination and a source of quiet terror did not begin in violence, but in hardship. The Maine of the early 1870s was a region still healing from the scars of the Civil War. Small villages like the one near Bangor had sent their young men to fight far-off battles, from Gettysburg to Antietam. Many did not return. Those who limped home came back with grievous injuries or unseen wounds of the mind. Towns were dotted with grieving widows and veterans haunted by nightmares, struggling to rebuild their lives in a place where every family had an empty chair at the table. The Pierce family farm lay nestled in a wooded hollow 5 miles outside of town. It had once been a cheerful homestead, a sturdy log house built by Nathaniel's grandfather, fields of hay and corn, and a barn full of dairy cows. But by 1871, those better days were a memory. John Pierce, Nathaniel's father, had marched off with a Maine regiment in 1864, only to perish of fever in a Union field hospital before ever facing battle. The loss broke Nathaniel's mother, Catherine. She was left a young widow with an infant son and no means of paying the banknote on their land. Catherine survived by sheer grit and the charity of neighbors, taking in mending and laundry, and trading whatever she could from a small vegetable garden. Nathaniel was a quiet, solemn child from the start. Too serious for a little boy, the pastor's wife would often say after church. The truth was that Nathaniel's early years were anything but ordinary. As an infant, he rarely slept more than an hour or two at a stretch, often remaining eerily alert in his crib long after other babies would have drifted to dreamland. Catherine tried everything the midwives advised: warm goat's milk, chamomile tea, soft lullabies, even a few drops of laudanum syrup. Nothing kept the child asleep for long. From the time he could crawl, Nathaniel would pull himself upright in the night and stare quietly at the shadows, as if sleep were just a curious idea meant for others. By age 3, Nathaniel all but stopped sleeping entirely. He would lie down dutifully after supper, when his mother told him to. But Catherine would wake in the middle of the night to find her boy sitting at the foot of her bed in the dark, wide awake and silent. "I'm watching over you, Mama," he would say in a small voice. It was as heartwarming as it was unsettling. Catherine began to fear that something was very wrong with her child. In those days, rural Mainers were quick to whisper of curses or folk afflictions. A baby that wouldn't sleep might be thought a changeling left by fairies or touched by the devil. Desperate for help and keen to quash any superstitious gossip before it took root, Catherine turned to the only learned man she knew, Dr. Abraham Willard. Dr. Willard had served as an army surgeon during the war and had seen his share of medical oddities. But the case of Nathaniel Pierce tested the limits of his knowledge. In June of 1864, Catherine carried 4-year-old Nathaniel into the doctor's examining room, the child pale and strangely alert in her arms. She confessed to the doctor that her son seemingly never slept, bracing herself for a dismissive chuckle or a scolding about a mother's exaggerations. Instead, Dr. Willard peered into Nathaniel's clear blue eyes, noted the absence of the usual drowsiness one expects in a young child, and asked Catherine to put the boy down. Nathaniel stood quietly by the desk, tiny for his age, but perfectly steady on his feet. He did not fidget or yawn as other children might. The doctor conducted a thorough examination and found the boy remarkably healthy in most respects. Heart, lungs, reflexes all normal, save for a mild softness in muscle tone and dark shadows under his eyes. "Do you feel tired, son?" Dr. Willard asked. Nathaniel shook his head. He was well behaved and answered politely any question put to him, but volunteered little. The doctor was particularly struck by the child's gaze. Nathaniel watched Dr. Willard with an intensity more common in grown men studying a problem than in children encountering a friendly stranger. "It was as if he was examining me as much as I him," the doctor later wrote. The boy's eyes were bright, focused, and utterly free of that haze of fatigue one sees even in the most stubborn insomniacs. I felt, quite irrationally, as though I were the specimen under observation, a feeling I had experienced only once before, when a captive wolf locked eyes with me from behind the bars of a cage. Dr. Willard was a methodical man. Rather than dismiss Catherine's concerns, he decided to document Nathaniel's condition rigorously. He provided Catherine with a journal and instructed her to keep a detailed log of Nathaniel's sleeping habits. When he lay down, for how long, and any time she observed him truly asleep. The doctor himself would stop by the Pierce farm at odd hours unannounced to verify the boy's state. What he found was astonishing. Over the next year, Nathaniel did not sleep for more than a handful of minutes at a time, if at all. He would close his eyes occasionally, even lie still, as if in rest. But Catherine never saw the rhythmic breathing or limp relaxation of true sleep. More often, Nathaniel simply stayed awake all night, passing the time by arranging his toys, looking at picture books, or gazing out the window at the moonlit fields. On several occasions, Dr. Willard arrived at the farm in the dead of night, 1, 2, even 3 in the morning, to find lamplight glimmering through the cracks of the shutters. Inside, he would discover young Nathaniel sitting at the kitchen table, quietly drawing pictures on scraps of paper, while Catherine dozed in a chair nearby, exhausted from trying to coax her son to rest. Each time, the boy would look up and greet the doctor with perfect composure, as though it were the middle of the afternoon. He exhibited none of the disorientation or irritability one would expect from a child roused out of deep sleep. He had not been roused at all, because he had never fallen asleep. Dr. Willard's initial journal entries from 1864 express a mix of excitement and concern. A case of genuine chronic sleeplessness in one so young was unheard of. There were legends, perhaps, of mystics in far-off lands who supposedly never slept, or rare cases of adults with brain injuries who lost the need for sleep for months. But a small child with boundless insomnia? The doctor feared for Nathaniel's health. By all medical understanding, prolonged sleep deprivation should lead to cognitive impairment, illness, even death. And yet Nathaniel persisted, day after day, night after night, bright-eyed and alert. The doctor began consulting medical texts and writing letters to colleagues in Boston and New York for advice. Most responded with disbelief, assuming either exaggeration or misobservation. A Boston physician flatly wrote back, "Impossible. The child would be dead if truly deprived of sleep so long. Check the mother's veracity." Dr. Willard, however, had seen with his own eyes that Catherine spoke the truth. Nathaniel's continued health in the absence of sleep was a riddle he felt compelled to solve, or at least to document for posterity. He formally enlisted the aid of the Pierce family, arranging to spend one night a week at their farm, observing Nathaniel in person from dusk till dawn. In return, he offered his medical services to Catherine and the boy free of charge, and provided extra kerosene and candles to light the long nights. As Nathaniel grew older, his nocturnal life became a fixture of the community's quiet gossip. By 1866, 7-year-old Nathaniel was an oddly familiar sight at unusual hours. Farmers traveling pre-dawn to get milk to the dairy in town would sometimes spot a small figure perched in the hayloft window of the Pierce barn, watching the road in the gray morning light. A couple of insomniac townsfolk, who might take a stroll on a sleepless night, reported seeing Nathaniel walking through his family's moonlit fields, seemingly lost in thought, or perhaps listening to the owls. Mrs. Enid Griffith, an elderly neighbor, swore she often saw a candle flickering in the attic of the Pierce house at 2 or 3 in the morning, and a little shadow moving behind the glass. "That child's awake when all the world's asleep," she muttered to her husband. "It ain't natural. Mark my words, nothing good can come of it." Most neighbors tried to be kind, or at least keep their worries private. The Pierces had already endured enough tragedy with John's death in the war. Catherine was well liked for her perseverance and piety. She never missed a Sunday service, and often led the hymns with her clear, soothing voice. People told themselves that maybe Nathaniel was just an exceptionally quiet child who needed less rest. After all, he appeared polite and diligent. He attended the one-room schoolhouse when he turned 8. and though he was often observed reading or scribbling at his desk, while other children yawned on hot afternoons, Nathaniel kept up with his studies. If he occasionally seemed aloof or lost in his own thoughts, the teacher attributed it to shyness. Still, a few incidents caused concern. One spring morning, the schoolmaster arrived early to ring the bell and found Nathaniel already inside the schoolhouse, sitting alone at his desk in the semi-darkness. The boy had apparently slipped in through an unlocked window. "Why are you here so early, son?" the startled teacher asked. Nathaniel smiled mildly and replied, "I didn't want to be late. I've been awake for a long time." The answer sent a small chill through the teacher. It was spoken not with the plaintive annoyance of an impatient child, but with the calm, matter-of-fact tone of someone for whom hours had passed in solitude. After that, the schoolmaster made a point to double-check the locks each evening. It unnerved him to think of an 8-year-old wandering empty buildings in the night. On another occasion, just past midnight, on a frigid December night of 1866, the Reverend Joseph Mallory was returning from a sick parishioner's home when he spotted Nathaniel standing by the village's small covered bridge, lantern in hand. The boy's breath puffed white in the icy air, but he didn't seem bothered by the cold, despite having only a thin coat over his nightshirt. The Reverend, perplexed, asked what he was doing out at such an hour. "I heard someone crying," Nathaniel answered calmly. "I thought it might be a lost traveler or a ghost." Startled by the mention of a ghost, the Reverend guided Nathaniel back home at once. No lost traveler was ever found that night. The incident was chalked up to a child's overactive imagination, but in private, the Reverend confided to Dr. Willard that Nathaniel's expression had been unsettlingly serene, given the circumstances. He wasn't scared at all, Reverend Mallory recounted. Any other child would have been frightened, or at least nervous out there in the dark. But Nathaniel, he looked like he belonged in the night. Through all this, Dr. Willard's journals grew thick with observations. He noted Nathaniel's physical condition remained inexplicably strong. By age 9, the boy's height and weight were average for his age, and aside from slightly pale skin and those persistent dark circles under his eyes, he showed no signs of ill health. The doctor performed every test he could think of. He gently pricked the boy's skin to gauge sensation, normal. Checked his balance and coordination, also normal, and even tested his mental acuity with arithmetic and memory exercises. Nathaniel excelled, perhaps unsurprisingly given all the extra hours he had to read and study at night. The only abnormality was the total lack of fatigue. Occasionally, Nathaniel would rest. He would lie down and close his eyes if his mother insisted. But Dr. Willard often found that within minutes, the boy's eyes would be open again, staring at the ceiling or tracking the shadows that tree branches cast on the walls in lamplight. When asked why he couldn't sleep, Nathaniel had trouble explaining. "I do try," he told Dr. Willard earnestly, "but it feels like I'm still wide awake inside, even if I lie still. My mind won't go dark." In one candid moment, the boy admitted something that gave the doctor pause. In a soft, hesitant voice, Nathaniel confessed, "Sometimes, when I lie in the dark, I hear things. Or maybe I imagine them, like whispering. It's like the night is talking to me, and I have to stay awake to listen." When Dr. Willard pressed gently for more, Nathaniel grew unusually agitated and shook his head. "It doesn't make sense when I'm awake in the day," he muttered. "Forget I said anything." The doctor noted this as possible auditory hallucinations during rest likely due to chronic insomnia. But he also scribbled a private addendum in the margin. Or something else. By the summer of 1867, Nathaniel Pierce had gone over 4 continuous years without sleep. The sheer impossibility of this weighed on Dr. Willard. Fearing that his own objectivity might be compromised by the seeming supernatural nature of the case, he invited a colleague, Dr. Elijah Downing, up from Boston to observe Nathaniel firsthand. Dr. Downing arrived with healthy skepticism. He assumed he'd find a misdiagnosis, or perhaps catch the boy sleeping when Dr. Willard was not looking. However, after 3 days and nights in the Pierce home, Dr. Downing left Maine as perplexed and unnerved as Dr. Willard. Nathaniel had not slept a wink the entire time, and yet appeared as energetic on the 3rd night as a normal child on a sunny morning. In a confidential letter, Dr. Downing wrote, "Either this boy is an anomaly of nature, or something preternatural is at work. I do not say this lightly, but I have no scientific explanation for what I witnessed." Meanwhile, subtle signs of strain were beginning to appear, not in Nathaniel's body, which remained miraculously unaffected, but perhaps in his mind and behavior. Catherine Pierce loved her son dearly and did her best to give him a normal upbringing. She insisted he do chores on the farm, play outside during the day, and attend church and school like any other child. But she couldn't deny that he was different. He hardly ever laughed like other kids. He wasn't gloomy, exactly, just perpetually calm and serious. One day, Catherine found a sketchbook hidden under a loose floorboard in the attic, where Nathaniel liked to spend his nights. The pages were filled with surprisingly deft charcoal drawings. Some were innocent scenes, the family cow asleep in its stall, his schoolmates dreaming at their desks during a dull lesson. But others were more disturbing. Dark silhouettes standing at the foot of his mother's bed, a cluster of staring eyes peering in through the farmhouse windows at night, and one that made her blood run cold, a self-portrait of Nathaniel sitting wide-eyed on his bed, while a looming black shape with indistinct features hovered behind him, a long finger pressed to where its lips might be, as if saying, "Shh." Catherine took the drawings to Dr. Willard in tears. She feared that her son was tormented by his inability to sleep, perhaps plagued by waking nightmares. The doctor was troubled as well. These images hinted at a rich and possibly frightening inner world Nathaniel was experiencing in the loneliest hours of the night. Dr. Willard gently questioned the boy about the drawings. Nathaniel was initially upset that his private sketchbook had been discovered, but he eventually answered. "I draw what I see sometimes," he said simply. He would not elaborate on what the black shape was, and the doctor, sensing the boy's discomfort, did not press him further just then. That fall, a series of odd occurrences stirred the town, and many began to wonder if the Pierce boys' sleepless vigil might be somehow connected. It started with animals. The Pierce's own dairy cow, Betsy, a gentle Jersey who had provided milk for the family for years, was found one morning wandering the pasture, with her eyes clouded milky white and streaks of tears down her face. She was blind. Dr. Willard examined the cow and found no injury or obvious infection. Catherine mentioned in a hushed tone that Nathaniel had been out in the barn past midnight the previous night, humming to Betsy to calm her during a thunderstorm. Could the lightning have spooked the cow into some kind of seizure? The doctor was doubtful. Blindness without cause was strange. Betsy had to be slaughtered before winter, being of no further use. and Catherine quietly buried the unsettling detail that her boy had been present just before the affliction. Then, the Griffiths' hunting dog, a large Mastiff mix named Rufus, disappeared from his kennel. A search was organized, and Nathaniel, always eager to be helpful, joined the townsmen combing the woods by lamplight. It was Nathaniel who found Rufus at dawn. The dog was lying deep in the underbrush, alive but unresponsive, as if in a coma. When Dr. Willard inspected the animal, he found Rufus's paws were raw and bloody, as if he had frantically run in circles for hours. The dog never fully recovered. He remained skittish, often staring at dark corners of rooms and whining, as if he sensed something others could not. Again, these incidents were not explicitly tied to Nathaniel, but some couldn't help noting that he was oddly present at each scene, calm and observant, while others panicked. The truly chilling event that autumn was the night death visited the village. On October 2nd, 1867, an elderly widow named Agnes Miller died in her sleep, or so it was assumed. She lived alone at the edge of town and was found in her bed when a neighbor noticed her chimney had no smoke and went to check on her. Given her age, a natural passing was the likely cause, and no doctor was summoned initially. But at the funeral, whispers spread that there was something strange about her death. Her daughter, who came in from out of town to prepare the body for burial, confided to the pastor that Agnes's face had been oddly contorted, her eyes wide open, as though she had died in the middle of a terror. Out of respect, the undertaker had carefully closed her eyes for the viewing. The daughter also mentioned one more detail. On the nightstand, she found a spilled oil lamp and soot on Agnes's fingertips, as if she had grasped at the lamp, maybe to light it. After the burial, Reverend Mallory, unsettled by what he'd heard, discreetly asked around if anyone had seen or heard anything on the night Agnes died. It turned out that Nathaniel Pierce had been out that night as well, which was not unusual in itself, except this time he had paid a visit to Mrs. Miller's home. Nathaniel admitted to the Reverend and Dr. Willard that he'd gone to check on the old woman because, he said, "I saw a light moving in her window and thought she might need help." He claimed he knocked and got no answer, peered in through a window and saw nothing but darkness, then went home. It sounded innocent enough, and indeed, perhaps he had tried to be a good Samaritan, but a chilling possibility took hold in Dr. Willard's mind. What if Agnes had lit that lamp because something frightened her in the dark? Perhaps a small boy appearing at her window in the dead of night. Or something else that Nathaniel's presence there hinted at. Dr. Willard began to wonder if Nathaniel's relentless wakefulness had begun to erode his understanding of boundaries. The boy had all the time in the world at night to roam where no one else would be awake to notice. Perhaps he had taken to visiting homes, peeking in windows out of curiosity. Such behavior would understandably startle a lone old woman. When asked directly, Nathaniel neither confessed nor denied entering Mrs. Miller's yard. He only stated he knocked at the door. There were no signs of foul play in Agnes's death that anyone could act upon. But from that night forward, a sense of unease crept into the community. Doors were locked more diligently, shutters drawn tight. A few families even started placing crude, evil eye charms or crosses above their door frames, warding off any evil that might wander in the dark. Catherine Pierce could not ignore the uneasy looks that some townsfolk began casting at her son. Though no one said it openly, she knew some considered Nathaniel cursed. Her sweet boy, who had barely ever harmed a fly, now walked through the village like an omen of misfortune, simply because he was always awake to be present when bad things happened. Catherine's heart broke at the thought, but she also had her own quiet fears. On more than one occasion, she had woken at midnight to find Nathaniel standing at her bedside, watching her sleep. He never did anything except sometimes gently place a cool hand on her forehead, checking perhaps if she had a fever, like a little guardian. He would hush her if she stirred. "It's okay, Mama. Go back to sleep," he whispered. Catherine tried to tell herself this was a sign of her son's caring nature, yet part of her wondered what thoughts occupied his mind during those long vigils. In the spring of 1868, Nathaniel turned 10 years old. By now, Dr. Willard had documented well over 1,200 nights of continuous wakefulness, and Nathaniel showed no sign of slowing down. If anything, he had grown even more energetic and curious during the nocturnal hours. Around this time, Nathaniel formed a rare friendship with another local boy, Samuel Thatcher, who was a year older. Samuel was a boisterous, athletic kid, known for skipping stones across the creek and climbing tall apple trees. It was a curious pairing, the quiet, insomniac Nathaniel and the lively, sun-loving Samuel. But the two bonded over a shared interest in constellations. Samuel once saw Nathaniel gazing at the stars from a haystack late at night, and, being a bold boy, snuck out to join him. Instead of scolding, Nathaniel welcomed the company and eagerly pointed out the patterns he had learned from books. From that night on, the boys would occasionally meet in secret after dark to stargaze or roam the fields. Catherine was uneasy about it, but she was relieved her son had a friend and hoped the play might somehow tire him enough to sleep. It never did. Samuel's parents, however, had no idea their son was wandering at night, until an incident in June 1868 shook both families. It began as a dare. According to Samuel, as later recorded by Dr. Willard, Nathaniel proposed an experiment one warm evening as they sat on a hill under the bright sweep of the Milky Way. Nathaniel wondered aloud how long someone could stay awake if they really tried. Samuel bragged he could stay up all night easily. He had done it once on a fishing trip with his pa. Nathaniel's eyes had a peculiar shine as he turned to his friend and asked, "What about 2 nights? 3? A whole week, maybe?" Samuel laughed, thinking it a joke, but Nathaniel's expression remained serious. "Let's try it," he suggested. "We can be like explorers venturing into a new world, the world of no sleep. I do it all the time. I'll help you." Samuel, caught up in the spirit of adventure, agreed, and so the two boys made a pact to secretly meet every night and not sleep at all for as many days as they could, without telling anyone. Nathaniel coached Samuel on tricks to fight off drowsiness, splashing cold water on your face, taking brisk walks in the chill night air, nibbling on raw potato, something Nathaniel did when boredom hit. The sharp taste gave a small jolt, he claimed. Samuel managed to get through the first night full of adrenaline. He even enjoyed the feeling of rebellion, sneaking back into bed just before dawn so his parents wouldn't notice. The second night was harder. Nathaniel kept him awake by engaging him in constant conversation, asking endless questions about how Samuel felt, what he was thinking, if he saw the shadows flickering just beyond the lamplight, or heard distant whispers. Samuel admitted later that at the time he thought those questions were just games, spooky stories to keep him alert. By the third night, Samuel was struggling mightily. His hands trembled, his speech slurred with fatigue. He complained of headaches and moments when his vision would blur. Nathaniel remained wide-eyed and attentive, encouraging him gently. "You can do it. Don't give up now. Think of how amazing it will be to tell everyone you stayed awake for 3 whole days." But Samuel was reaching his limit. Sometime in the pre-dawn hours of that 3rd night, as they crept through the dark woods behind Samuel's barn, the older boy suddenly stopped. He later recounted, haltingly, that the forest around him began to warp and sway. The trees looked as if they were bending down, their branches reaching for him like gnarled hands. He heard a buzzing in his ears that turned into a chorus of voices. Overwhelmed by terror and confusion, Samuel ran. Nathaniel tried to catch up, calling his name quietly so as not to wake the whole town, but Samuel was in a panic. Samuel's flight ended at the Thatcher's chicken coop, where he stumbled over a feed bucket and crashed through the coop's door, sending chickens squawking in every direction. The ruckus woke the Thatcher household. By the time Samuel's father reached the yard with a lantern, the boy was cowering in a corner of the coop, muttering about faces in the trees and eyes in the dark that don't blink. He was in a delirious state, and the family was terrified that he had taken ill or lost his wits. Nathaniel had slipped away unseen in the chaos. Dr. Willard was summoned to examine Samuel. The diagnosis was extreme exhaustion and shock, though the cause was unclear until Samuel, after sleeping the better part of a day and regaining his senses, confessed the whole experiment. The revelation was met with horror by the adults. Samuel's parents forbade him from ever going out at night again, but he insisted that none of it had been Nathaniel's fault. "I wanted to prove I could do what he does," Samuel told Dr. Willard. "I wanted to see what he sees at night, but it was too much. I started seeing things that weren't there. I don't know how Nathaniel does it every night by himself without going crazy." The boy's earnest defense of his friend did little to ease the suspicion now directed at Nathaniel. If anything, many found it unnatural that Nathaniel had led the experiment, yet came out utterly unscathed, while Samuel had nearly lost his mind after just 3 nights. The implication was clear. Nathaniel Pierce was not like other children. For Dr. Willard, this incident was a tipping point. He realized that Nathaniel's condition was not only a medical mystery, but a potentially grave danger to himself and others. Nathaniel's understanding of the limits of human endurance seemed deficient. He had treated their sleepless game like a benign adventure when it could have killed Samuel. It wasn't malice, the doctor believed, but a profound lack of normal empathy or fear. Nathaniel simply didn't comprehend what others experienced in fatigue and sleepiness because he never felt it. To him, persuading a friend to stay awake indefinitely was no more harmful than asking someone to go for a long walk. Dr. Willard redoubled his efforts to find some cure, or at least an explanation. He tried stronger sedatives on Nathaniel, under controlled conditions, including a draft of chloral hydrate, a newly discovered sedative, and even small doses of opium. The results were unnerving. The chloral hydrate, enough to fell a grown man into deep sleep, only made Nathaniel groggy and inarticulate for an hour. He swayed on his feet, and his eyes grew heavy, but he did not fall asleep. It was as if some internal mechanism fought off the drug's effect with ferocious efficiency. Opium tincture had an even stranger outcome. The boy became flushed and giggly for a short time, a stark change from his usual composure that Catherine found both relieving and disconcerting. But still he did not sleep. Instead, he complained of vivid waking dreams. He described seeing swirling colors and tiny creatures creeping along the walls. The doctor stopped the trials, worried he might do irreversible harm if he increased doses further. "I fear what might happen if this child ever truly falls asleep," Dr. Willard confided in his journal. "His body might not remember how to do it. What if the shock of sleep, like water to a parched man, overwhelms his system? Or worse, what if there is some truth to his hints of whispers in the dark? Am I courting nightmares by attempting to force the issue?" These thoughts were more fanciful than the stoic doctor usually allowed himself, but he could not shake them. Nathaniel, for his part, seemed unfazed by the failed sedatives. He even comforted his anxious mother afterward, patting her hand and saying, "Don't worry, Mama. I don't mind being awake. I'll take care of you." Throughout 1868 and into 1869, the uneasy aura around Nathaniel deepened. The phrase, "the boy who never slept," had by now spread beyond the village. Travelers passing through would sometimes ask at the tavern about the local curiosity. This embarrassed Catherine and annoyed Dr. Willard, who tried to keep details under wraps to prevent sensationalism. The doctor's ongoing study was yielding more questions than answers. Nathaniel's temperature, blood pressure, as best as could be measured with the era's instruments, and other vitals remained normal. How could a human body sustain itself like this? Did he slip into micro-naps when no one noticed? Dr. Willard tested that by engaging Nathaniel in conversation or tasks at random times during the night. The boy was always immediately responsive. If he had been drifting off even for seconds, it was imperceptible and had no cumulative effect. Underneath the medical perplexity, something more troubling was brewing. Nathaniel's personality, or perhaps his demeanor, had started to shift in subtle ways. He still behaved politely with adults when directly addressed, but he had grown more withdrawn, as if part of him permanently dwelled in some inner world of thought. In church, he would stare blankly at the stained glass windows, not in boredom, but as if distracted by something unseen. His teacher noted that Nathaniel sometimes didn't respond to his own name immediately in the daytime, as though he were far away. But at night, according to Dr. Willard's observations, Nathaniel was as sharp and active as ever, sometimes even too energetic. The doctor described nights when the boy would pace the house restlessly, like a caged animal, or climb onto the roof to sit under the stars for hours. It was becoming clear that if Nathaniel's body did not require sleep, his mind might be paying the price in other ways. Catherine occasionally heard him talking to himself in low murmurs upstairs. When she'd gently peek in, she'd find him alone, looking a touch embarrassed. "Just thinking out loud," he'd say. But Dr. Willard wondered if Nathaniel had begun hearing those whispers more frequently, the ones he once mentioned. Could it be an early sign of psychosis? Or was he conversing with something only he could perceive in the sleepless dark? Then came the incident of the sparrows. On a bright July morning in 1869, villagers awoke to find hundreds of dead sparrows littering the main road and adjacent rooftops. The tiny birds appeared to have simply fallen from the sky in the middle of the night. Such a strange rain of birds startled everyone. Some blamed a sudden poison in the air or a freak storm, though the night had been clear. A few superstitious voices hushedly wondered if this was a bad omen, a warning of pestilence or doom. Dr. Willard was one of the people who went out early to inspect the scene. To his surprise and alarm, he found Nathaniel already out in the street, gingerly picking up a lifeless sparrow with a gloved hand. The boy was turning the tiny corpse this way and that, examining it closely. When he noticed the doctor, Nathaniel said in a soft, curious tone, "They were asleep when they died. I think they hit the ground before they even knew what happened." It was a peculiar thing to say. Dr. Willard asked why Nathaniel was out so early. Nathaniel replied, "I heard a sound like rain in the night, but it was clear, so I went to see. It was the birds falling." If true, the boy had witnessed the entire bizarre event. The doctor couldn't tell what unsettled him more, the unexplained rain of dead birds, or Nathaniel's preternatural composure in describing it. Kneeling down, Dr. Willard examined a few sparrow bodies. They showed no wounds, no disease, as if they had simultaneously expired mid-flight. Perhaps they inhaled toxic fumes from a meteorite or lightning high above. There was no obvious answer. Later that day, as an experiment, Dr. Willard asked Nathaniel to come by his office. He wanted to gauge the boy's emotional response to the sparrows. The doctor laid out one of the tiny bird corpses, kept cool in the cellar, on a cloth, and gently prompted Nathaniel to talk about it. Most children would be saddened, or at least disturbed by such a sight. But Nathaniel was analytical. "They look peaceful, don't they?" he said, pointing to the birds' closed eyes. "I wonder if they were dreaming when it happened." Then Nathaniel looked up at the doctor and asked, "Where do you think we go in our minds when we sleep? Is it the same place we go when we die?" The question gave Dr. Willard pause. It was a philosophical query coming from a 10-year-old, delivered in a tone one might use for idle conversation about the weather. The doctor responded that people have debated that for ages, and asked what Nathaniel thought. The boy traced a finger gently along the bird's wing. "I think maybe sleep is a taste of death," he murmured. "That's why our souls need to come back. Otherwise, we'd drift away. I've never drifted away. I'm always here, watching, waiting." "Waiting for what?" the doctor asked, heart creeping into his throat for reasons he couldn't fully explain. Nathaniel shrugged and gave the slightest smile. "To see what happens next." Alarmed by Nathaniel's increasingly unnerving remarks and the sense that something was building, Dr. Willard decided it was time to search for concrete evidence of any harm Nathaniel might be causing or any deeper disturbances in his psyche. The doctor realized that despite all his observation, he had rarely pried into Nathaniel's private nighttime activities unless invited. The boy had the run of his home and farm each night while his mother slept. Who knew what he might be up to, intentionally or unintentionally? The sketchbook Catherine found hinted at a rich inner life. Perhaps Nathaniel kept other records or items that could shed light on his mind. In October 1869, under the guise of a routine house call, Dr. Willard visited the Pierce home in the late afternoon. He brought a new sleeping tonic he claimed to have procured. In truth, a simple but strong herbal tea, and managed to convince Catherine to drink it, insisting she needed rest from her constant worry. The tonic gently put Catherine into a deep, calm sleep early that night. The doctor felt a twinge of guilt for essentially drugging the poor woman, but he had to ensure she wouldn't awaken and interfere with what he planned next. Nathaniel was curious why the doctor had not left by evening. Dr. Willard told him kindly that he wished to spend the night observing as he sometimes did, to see if perhaps that night Nathaniel might finally sleep. A small white lie. Nathaniel acquiesced without much interest and busied himself with a jigsaw puzzle at the kitchen table. As midnight neared, Willard feigned taking a nap in a rocking chair, hoping Nathaniel would go about his usual business without inhibition if he thought the doctor dozed. Through slitted eyes, Dr. Willard watched the boy. Nathaniel glanced over at his slumped form and, satisfied the doctor was asleep, stood up. He stretched, an odd thing to see at midnight, as if someone were waking to start their day. And then he moved toward the attic ladder with a lamp. Quietly, Nathaniel climbed up into the attic. After giving him a few minutes, Dr. Willard rose and followed. He was careful to step quietly on the wooden rungs. The attic was dimly lit by Nathaniel's oil lamp set on a crate. The boy had his back turned, engrossed in something on a small desk in the corner. Dr. Willard paused in the shadows, watching. Nathaniel was writing in a notebook, his pen scratches soft in the silence. Beside him was an assortment of objects, laid out with meticulous care. The doctor's eyes adjusted, and he could make them out. Several small jars with what looked like insects preserved in alcohol, a couple of dried animal hearts or other organs, perhaps from rabbits or squirrels, lined up on a cloth, and an array of feathers, sparrow feathers, he realized, carefully tied together in little bundles. There was also a neat stack of papers, which Nathaniel would occasionally reference as he wrote in his notebook. Dr. Willard took another silent step up, and the old wood creaked. Nathaniel whirled around, eyes wide, not with guilt, but excitement. "Dr. Willard," he said brightly, "I thought you were sleeping." Caught, the doctor ascended the rest of the way, heart pounding not only from being discovered, but from the uncanny scene before him. "I couldn't stay asleep," he replied softly. By the lamplight, he could now see more clearly Nathaniel's midnight collection. Indeed, the jars contained insects, moths and beetles mostly, some of which looked as if they'd been dissected. The animal organs were arrayed next to a penknife and tweezers. The papers were sketches similar to those Catherine had found before, but far more graphic. One showed a detailed anatomy of a mouse, with notes on the side about how long it moved after decapitation. Another depicted a sleeping human, maybe Mrs. Miller, the widow, with a dark, amorphous shape hovering above, labeled "Nightmare Feeds Here." And then there were the written journals themselves. Nathaniel had been keeping his own records. The boy didn't panic or try to hide anything. Instead, with that same eerie composure, he gestured for the doctor to come closer. "I'm glad you're here. I've been meaning to show you this," Nathaniel said, as if proud of his work. He pointed to his notebook, which Dr. Willard carefully took. Skimming through it, the doctor's breath caught. Nathaniel had been conducting experiments, many, many experiments, in secret, during those nights. He documented how he caught moths and kept them awake by prodding them until they died. Time to death was logged meticulously. He wrote about capturing a stray cat, noted that cats are nocturnal, but still sleep some, and described in unsettling detail how he tried to keep the cat awake for days. The entry concluded with the cat attacking him in a frenzy, and Nathaniel killing it with a blow from a fireplace poker. He dissected the cat to see if lack of sleep changed its insides, and even kept its heart and some bones, which presumably were what lay on the cloth. Dr. Willard's hands trembled as he turned the pages. There were observations of his own family's cow, Betsy. Nathaniel noted how the cow grew agitated in the storm. and a later note speculated whether certain herbs might cause blindness if put in the animal's feed. Was that what happened to Betsy? Another section covered the experiment with Samuel Thatcher. Nathaniel coldly assessed Samuel's deterioration over the nights they stayed awake. The tone was detached, scientific. Subject began hallucinating on third night, confirming hypothesis that others cannot easily do what I do. No hint of remorse was evident, just an almost clinical interest. The doctor looked at Nathaniel, who waited expectantly for his reaction like a student proud of a science project. Nathaniel? Why? Dr. Willard asked, barely above a whisper. The boy tilted his head. I needed to understand. If I'm different, why not learn everything about it? I wanted to see if others could join me in wakefulness, or if animals could. But none can. It's just me. He said this with a mix of pride and loneliness. Dr. Willard carefully set down the notebook. His medical instincts warred with a dawning horror. This polite, small child had been performing acts of cruelty and extreme risk, all under the guise of curiosity. Nathaniel, these experiments, they're dangerous. And cruel, the doctor added, placing a hand on the notebook page that described the cat's death. Nathaniel's face remained calm, but his words took on a slightly colder edge. You experiment on patients sometimes, don't you? To help them. I wasn't trying to be cruel. I gave the cat food and water. I pet her nicely when she got scared. Until she turned mean. It's not my fault she couldn't keep up. It was such a chillingly adult justification delivered by a 10-year-old that Dr. Willard hardly knew how to respond. He realized Nathaniel might be far more disconnected from normal emotion than he had thought. The endless wakeful hours had given him time to intellectualize everything, to detach from empathy, much like a seasoned surgeon might detach to perform a life-saving amputation. But Nathaniel wasn't saving lives. He was probing at the boundaries of life and sanity with a child's lack of moral compass and an adult's calculated patience. As Dr. Willard searched for words, his gaze fell on a newer drawing on the desk, one that made his blood run cold. It showed the interior of a bedroom, Catherine's bedroom, recognizable from the furnishings. In the picture, Catherine lay asleep in her bed, and standing over her was Nathaniel with a curious blank expression. In his hand was a pillow, and it was poised as if he were about to press it over his mother's face. The detail was so precise that the doctor staggered back. "What is this, Nathaniel? What are you drawing here?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. Nathaniel looked at the picture thoughtfully. Sometimes I wonder what would happen if she slept forever. Would it feel the same to me as when others sleep? I watch people sleep all the time, you know. They look peaceful, but they leave me alone. He traced a finger over the drawn pillow. Mama worries so much. If she didn't worry, she could rest. Maybe I could help her rest. Dr. Willard felt a surge of alarm. This was beyond idle curiosity. It sounded like intent. The boy in front of him, with his slender arms and steady eyes, was contemplating murder out of a twisted sense of mercy, or perhaps experimentation. Nathaniel, noticing the doctor's distress, quickly added, "I haven't done anything. I only thought about it." It's like when I hold the pillow, she calms down. Her breathing slows. I did that once for a minute and she looked so calm. But I stopped. He had attempted it, at least in part. The doctor had heard enough. The time for passive observation was over. This had become an emergency. "Nathaniel, listen to me," Dr. Willard said firmly, edging toward the attic opening. "You are very sick, even if you don't feel it. You must know these things you've been doing are wrong. I'm going to get you help, but you need to stay here." He tried to sound authoritative, as he would with an unruly patient, while his mind raced with how to ensure Catherine's safety and the boy's containment. Nathaniel's placid mask slipped for the first time in a long while. He frowned in confusion and a flash of anger. "I don't need help. I'm not sick. I'm special. You said so yourself. I'm an anomaly," he insisted, voice rising from its usual monotone. He stepped in front of Dr. Willard, small hands balled into fists. "You're going to tell Sheriff Monroe, aren't you? Or take me away? They'll treat me like a freak." Dr. Willard had hoped to avoid a confrontation until he had backup, but Nathaniel's perceptiveness was too keen. The boy indeed guessed his intentions. Keeping his voice calm, the doctor tried to reason. "Nathaniel, you've done harmful things, even if you didn't mean to. I can't just ignore that. I care about you and your mother's safety. Let's go downstairs and talk this through with your mother when she wakes, all right?" He slowly moved, attempting to step around Nathaniel to the ladder. Suddenly, Nathaniel blew out the oil lamp, plunging the attic into darkness. The swift, confident motion and the immediate blackness stunned Dr. Willard into freezing for a split second. In that split second, something whistled past his face. A glass jar, which shattered against the wall behind him. Nathaniel had thrown it. The doctor stumbled back toward the opening, only to feel a sharp pain as the boy struck out with his penknife, slicing the doctor's forearm. It was a shallow cut, but enough to jolt Dr. Willard into action. He barreled forward in the dark, trying to grab Nathaniel, but the boy was unbelievably agile and sure-footed in the pitch black. Of course he is, the doctor realized. Nathaniel had spent his whole life navigating darkness without sleep. He probably knew the attic by feel better than a cat. Nathaniel slipped down the ladder before Dr. Willard could catch him, and the doctor heard the thud as the attic trapdoor slammed shut. Panicked, Dr. Willard wrenched it open and descended in pursuit, blood dripping from his arm. Downstairs, Catherine was miraculously still asleep in her drugged rest despite the noise. A mercy, perhaps, but also a vulnerability. Nathaniel was not in the kitchen. The front door was ajar, a cool night breeze blowing in. The boy had fled into the darkness outside. Grabbing a lantern from the kitchen hook and lighting it with trembling hands, Dr. Willard stepped out into the yard. The night was moonless, and the trees and fields of the Pierce farm were silent and impenetrably dark beyond the lantern's small radius. "Nathaniel," he called, first in a low voice, then louder. There was no response, only the chirr of crickets and the distant hoot of an owl. The doctor realized with dread that he might be alone with Nathaniel in the night, in a deadly game of hide-and-seek. That cunning child could be anywhere, watching him, perhaps readying another attack. Heart pounding, Dr. Willard carefully backed into the house and shut the door. His priority now was Catherine's safety and sending word for help. He locked the door and went to Catherine's bedside. She was still breathing deeply, oblivious. Good. The doctor quickly tore a strip from a towel and wrapped it around his bleeding arm. Then he found Catherine's revolver. Many rural widows kept one for protection in the bedside drawer. He had never imagined he might have to use it to protect her from her own son. but tonight defied all expectation. From outside came a faint scraping sound, like a shoe on the porch. Dr. Willard's nerves jumped. He positioned himself in the front room, lantern set on the table, revolver in hand. "Nathaniel, please," he called out toward a window. "Don't hurt anyone. We can talk. I promise I'll listen." His voice echoed slightly in the small house. There was no answer. Minutes crept by with agonizing slowness. The doctor caught himself nearly nodding off, the adrenaline fading for a moment, and shook his head. "Stay awake," he chided himself sardonically. Who knew the danger of sleep better than now? Just then, a crash of shattering glass exploded behind him. He whirled to see a brick lying on the floor amidst glass shards. Nathaniel had thrown it through the back window. The doctor spun back toward the front door just in time to see it swing open. Nathaniel stood there, silhouetted by the starlight. In his hand glinted a hay hook, a sharp iron tool used to lift bales of hay. The boy's face was a mask of cold resolve utterly out of place on a child. Without a word, he lunged at Dr. Willard. The next moments were a blur of terror. Nathaniel was small, but he was fast, and knew the house's layout intimately. He feinted toward the doctor's wounded side, causing Willard to stumble back, then darted the other way, attempting to get past him, perhaps toward his mother's room. The doctor realized Nathaniel's intention might be to take Catherine as leverage or worse, to carry out his twisted idea of helping her rest forever. With a surge of protective fury, Dr. Willard intercepted the boy, grappling with him in the narrow hallway. Nathaniel slashed the hay hook, grazing the doctor's thigh. In return, the doctor struck the boy's wrist with the barrel of the revolver, knocking the hook from his hand. Nathaniel did not cry out. He never uttered a sound of pain or anger, only clamped his jaw in determination. They struggled, the boy wriggling with almost snake-like agility from the doctor's grasp twice. It was like trying to restrain a wildcat in the dark. Nathaniel bit, scratched, and even kicked the lantern off the table, plunging them again into near darkness save for moonlight through the broken door. As the doctor fought to hold on to the squirming child, he realized with a sickening feeling that Nathaniel was not panicking. He was calculating. The boy's eyes, shining in the faint light, were focused and fierce, looking for any opening to exploit. At last, with a desperate effort, Dr. Willard managed to pin Nathaniel to the floor. The child still struggled, snarling now like an animal caught in a trap. The doctor, bleeding and shaking, raised the revolver, not wanting to shoot, but needing to frighten the boy into submission. "It's over, Nathaniel," he panted. "Don't move. Please, don't make me do something we'll both regret." For a moment, Nathaniel went still, his eyes locked onto the gun. Then, to the doctor's surprise, Nathaniel's lips curved into a faint smile. "You won't shoot me," he whispered. "I heard you talking to Mama once about God and souls. You think my soul can be saved. You won't risk sending me to hell." The words were those of a child, yet chilled Dr. Willard to the marrow. For indeed, he had spoken to Catherine about not giving up on Nathaniel morally. And even now, with everything he'd seen, part of the doctor desperately wanted to believe the boy could be helped, treated, rehabilitated. Nathaniel sensed this hesitation and began to push back up with uncanny strength. Just then, a loud bang came from the doorway. "Dr. Willard! Abraham!" a voice shouted. Sheriff Eli Monroe and 2 deputies burst into the house, pistols drawn and lanterns aloft. It was a miracle of timing, or rather, a testament to Dr. Willard's earlier arrangement. The doctor, upon discovering Nathaniel's intentions, had managed to scribble a quick note earlier that day to the sheriff requesting discreet backup that night, anticipating he might confront the boy about his findings. The sheriff, though skeptical, trusted the doctor enough to show up with men as asked. They had been waiting down the road, growing concerned by the noises and the extinguished light in the house, and decided to intervene at the sound of shattering glass. Nathaniel tensed at the sudden intrusion, his advantage lost. In a last act of defiance, or perhaps panic, he let out a hissing breath and tried to spring from under Doctor Willard toward the open doorway, but Sheriff Monroe was faster. The burly man scooped Nathaniel up under the arms, lifting him bodily as the deputies rushed to help secure the writhing boy. It took all three men and Dr. Willard to finally subdue and tie Nathaniel to a chair with rope. The child spat and thrashed, then abruptly fell into an eerie silence, glaring at each of them in turn with those sleepless blue eyes. "You should have stayed asleep," Nathaniel said softly, not specifying to whom or about what. None present dared to guess the meaning, but the menace in that childish voice gave them all pause. Sheriff Monroe, catching his breath, looked at Dr. Willard. The sheriff had known Nathaniel since he was born. Seeing him like this was like witnessing a rabid fox wearing the face of a boy. "Doctor, what in God's name is happening here?" he demanded. Dr. Willard, exhausted and heartsick, could only shake his head slowly. "Something I thought I understood. But I did not," he replied, voice quavering. The scene was secured. Catherine, mercifully, was still asleep in the other room, unaware of the violence that had just unfolded inches from her door. The men peered at Nathaniel, tied and disheveled, but now eerily calm once more. He almost looked like a normal frightened child after a tantrum, if not for those eyes that never wavered in their unsettling focus. Sheriff Monroe, recovering from shock, stepped forward. "Nathaniel Pierce, I'm placing you under guard for the attempted murder of your mother and assault on Dr. Willard," he said, voice as stern as if addressing an adult criminal. Nathaniel's face went blank at those words. Perhaps the reality was finally sinking in that there would be consequences he couldn't outsmart. As the deputies carefully hauled the boy to his feet and led him outside to the sheriff's wagon, Nathaniel turned back to glance at the interior of his house. He seemed to linger on the dark doorway of the bedroom where his mother slept peacefully. There was something unreadable in his expression. Could it be regret? Sadness? Or simply the calculation of a plan interrupted? Dr. Willard would wonder that for years afterward. Just as they were about to push him into the wagon, Nathaniel spoke one last time to Dr. Willard, who had followed behind. "You'll have to watch them for me now," the boy said. The doctor, puzzled, asked, "Watch who?" Nathaniel looked up at the night sky, where clouds drifted across a waning moon. "Everyone. They all go to sleep eventually," he answered. "Promise you'll watch them, Doctor, or they might not wake up." Before Dr. Willard could respond, the sheriff prodded Nathaniel into the wagon and shut the door. The boy's face disappeared into shadow as the lantern light flickered. Dr. Willard stood on the Pierce lawn, bleeding, aching, and feeling an immense sorrow wash over him. Nathaniel's words echoed in his mind. Was that a warning? A threat? Or the last plea of a child who truly believed dangers lurked in slumber? There was no time to decipher it then. The priority was ensuring the safety of Catherine and others. He resolved that Nathaniel must never be allowed to roam free until they understood what had gone so horribly wrong in his mind. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark historical mysteries. Hit the like button to support our channel, and don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. We have many more deep, dark tales to explore, and you won't want to miss what happens next in this very case. Now, let's uncover the aftermath of Nathaniel's capture and the shocking revelations that followed as the true extent of the nightmare finally came to light. Nathaniel Pierce was taken into custody that night, though the term custody was murky given his age. In 1871, there were no established protocols in Maine, or anywhere in America, for dealing with a child who had committed violent crimes or even attempted them. Juvenile justice as we know it didn't exist. An 11-year-old could not simply be thrown in a prison cell with adult criminals, and yet letting him go was unthinkable. In the immediate term, Sheriff Monroe kept Nathaniel in a makeshift holding situation. The boy was kept under watch in a spare room of the town's tiny courthouse building, with a deputy by his side at all times, day and night. Dr. Willard tended to his own wounds, and then broke the devastating news to Catherine as gently as possible when she awoke the next morning. It said her anguished cries could be heard from one end of the village to the other, as the reality sank in that her beloved child had nearly killed her and was implicated in so many horrors. Yet, Catherine insisted on seeing Nathaniel. Against the sheriff's advice, Dr. Willard escorted her to the courthouse. What happened during that mother-son meeting was only partially witnessed by deputies and recorded later in Dr. Willard's notes. Catherine entered the room, face drawn and eyes red from weeping. Nathaniel looked up from where he sat, chained to a chair. "Mama, I'm sorry," he said quietly. Catherine stopped a few feet away, as if afraid to approach. Nathaniel continued with an eerily calm tone. "I'm sorry I couldn't be what you wanted. I'm sorry I'm wrong." Catherine broke into fresh sobs and moved as if to hug him, but the deputy stepped between, uncertain if it was safe. Nathaniel did not attempt to move toward her, just watched. "They're going to take me away, Mama," he said, "but don't worry. I'll be good for them if I can. Dr. Willard will explain everything." Catherine only shook her head, repeating her son's name over and over, as if it was the only word she had left. She begged the sheriff to let him come home, promising to keep watch over him constantly, to which of course the sheriff sadly refused. It was decided that, at least until a judge could review the case, Nathaniel would remain secured. Meanwhile, Dr. Willard presented all the evidence he had gathered: Nathaniel's journal, the items from the attic, and his own diary of observations. The collective picture painted was staggering. Not only had Nathaniel been linked to attempted murder, but likely he was responsible for numerous incidents previously thought to be accidents or coincidences. The blinding of the cow Betsy, the death of Agnes Miller by fright, the mutilations or deaths of small animals around the area, and potentially even the falling sparrows, though that remained a mystery. Some wondered if Nathaniel had poisoned them as an experiment, but there was no proof. And over all of it loomed the baffling fact of Nathaniel's lifelong insomnia, which confounded natural explanation. News spread beyond the village. By the time a county judge and a state medical official arrived for an inquiry, rumors were rampant in the newspapers of the Maine wonder, The boy who never slept, now accused of heinous acts. The story was sensational enough that a few curiosity seekers and reporters began loitering around town, hoping for details. The judge imposed a gag order of sorts, instructing townsfolk and officials not to speak to press, fearing that a trial, if one were even possible, would be hopelessly tainted by gossip and hysteria. Nathaniel's case was eventually classified not as a criminal matter, but as a matter of insanity or mental infirmity, given his age and apparent psychological abnormality. It was the only way to legally avoid charging an 11-year-old with crimes that could potentially carry the death penalty. Maine still allowed execution, though rarely used it. No one wanted to contemplate hanging a child, no matter what he had done. Thus, by early 1872, the determination was made to send Nathaniel Pierce to the Maine Insane Hospital in Augusta, an asylum that had been established just a couple decades earlier. There, it was hoped, doctors could study and treat him. Dr. Willard, though heartbroken to see his young patient in shackles, firmly believed this was the safest outcome for everyone, including Nathaniel himself. Before the transfer, Sheriff Monroe confided to Dr. Willard that more strange incidents had happened while Nathaniel was held at the courthouse under guard. Deputies taking the night shift reported feeling extremely drowsy, far beyond normal, to the point one nearly fell asleep on his feet, right in front of the boy. "It's the damnedest thing," one deputy swore. "The kid would just stare at me from his chair, and I'd start nodding off like he was sucking the wakefulness out of me." Dr. Willard made a note, but didn't read too much into it. More likely, it was just the natural result of a tense, dull watch in a warm room. Still, it added to Nathaniel's growing legend among those who guarded him. The transfer to the asylum was done with little fanfare. Catherine was allowed one last visit. She gave Nathaniel a small Bible and a quilt she'd sewn for him. He thanked her, and according to Dr. Willard's account, advised her kindly to get some rest. She nearly collapsed, hearing her own son tell her to sleep after all that had happened. "I love you, Nathaniel," was all she could manage. He did not say it back. He simply watched as she left, perhaps the last person whose face he watched fall asleep, and now one of the last he would see in freedom. At the Maine Insane Hospital, Nathaniel quickly became a medical celebrity of sorts. A number of eminent doctors, including some from Harvard Medical School, traveled to Augusta specifically to observe the boy who never slept. They hoped to uncover the physiological secret that kept him awake, as well as to analyze his disturbing behaviors. Dr. Willard, feeling responsible, took a temporary position as a consulting physician at the hospital to assist in Nathaniel's treatment and to share his extensive notes. He delivered to the asylum staff his journals and Nathaniel's own writings, providing a full history of the case. The doctors began their work, and for the first few weeks there was optimism. Nathaniel's seeming cooperativeness was encouraging. He did not rant or rave like many other patients. In fact, he was rather quiet and well-mannered to staff, which initially led some to question if he was truly dangerous or simply misunderstood. But Dr. Willard cautioned them. Nathaniel had a way of mimicking normalcy when it suited him, like a fox sitting very still, so you'd forget it was a predator. The first priority was to verify the central claim. Did he truly never sleep? The asylum set up a rotating watch and even crude experiments. One doctor had Nathaniel hold a bell in his hand while lying in bed. If he drifted off, presumably the bell would fall and ring. It never did. Nurses reported that through the wee hours, if they peered through the observation slit, Nathaniel would often be found simply sitting up in bed, eyes open in the dark, waiting for morning. Sometimes he paced. To test whether he might be subtly dozing, micro-naps, they tried tasks at random times, asking him to solve a puzzle at 3 a.m. or recite passages from memory at 4:30 a.m. Nathaniel did so each time without mistake. After a full month of observation, the conclusion was inescapable. The boy truly did not sleep. Not in any way they could detect. One exhausted intern famously wrote, "If only we could bottle whatever essence keeps him so wakeful, we could replace coffee in every household in America." However, Nathaniel's psychological state was another matter. By outward appearance, he remained calm and displayed none of the agitation or wild delusions typical of asylum inmates. But Dr. Willard knew how to look closer. He noticed that Nathaniel was carefully studying the staff. Much like the boy had cataloged animals' reactions, it appeared he was now examining the habits and weaknesses of the hospital personnel. A nurse reported that he asked her many questions about how she handles patients who struggle, where keys were kept, who was on duty in various wings at night, etc. She thought it was innocent curiosity, perhaps anxiety about the new environment. But Dr. Willard heard alarm bells. He recognized the pattern of manipulation. Moreover, the doctor's attempts at treatment started to falter. They tried various methods to induce sleep, or at least calm his obviously abnormal brain activity. Hypnosis was attempted by a famed psychiatrist from Boston, but Nathaniel would only smirk and say, "I can play along if you want," then close his eyes and pretend, fooling no one. Sedative medications were administered more aggressively than Dr. Willard had dared back home. For an adult patient, they might have been lethal, but Nathaniel reacted in much the same way as before. Slight physiological changes, a drop in body temperature, a slower pulse, but no true sleep. One night, determined to see this through, a specialist gave Nathaniel a dose of morphine that should have knocked him out cold. Nathaniel grew woozy and was guided to bed, where he lay with eyes finally closed. The doctors watched in anticipation. Minutes passed, then an hour. The boy's body was still. Thinking they'd succeeded, one doctor was about to cheer, but Dr. Willard held him back. He pointed at Nathaniel's hand, which was gently tapping a finger in slow rhythm. The boy's eyes suddenly opened, and he said in a slurred voice, "Was I close? I almost caught a dream." Before his eyes rolled back and he vomited, body rejecting the narcotics assault. They had to quickly flush his system to prevent overdose. He never truly entered sleep. It was as if his mind hovered on the brink, then fought its way back. After that dangerous experiment, the asylum's director forbade further heavy drugging. One physician, half in jest, suggested perhaps Nathaniel's brain had fundamentally rewired itself to avoid or not require sleep, and that trying to force it could kill him or cause permanent damage. There were heated debates in medical journals, using pseudonyms for Nathaniel like Subject N, whether it was possible for a human to sustain without sleep. Nathaniel's case became a linchpin in early theories of neurology and sleep, though without modern science, they could not understand it fully. Some thought he had a lesion in the brain's sleep center, others that it was psychological trauma manifesting physically. A few even posited quasi-mystical ideas, that maybe his soul was somehow caught between waking and dreaming states, making him an embryonic psychic or medium. While the academics argued, dark events continued to dog Nathaniel's presence. The asylum at Augusta was a stark, gothic place, already reportedly haunted by the tormented energies of its inmates. With Nathaniel's arrival, some staff claimed the nights felt heavier. Several patients in the adjacent rooms to Nathaniel began to experience worse insomnia themselves. These were men who normally slept fitfully at best, yet now they were often found wide awake, babbling about night terrors lurking in the halls. One man shrieked that a small boy with burning eyes was sneaking into his room at night to steal dreams from his head. Of course, Nathaniel was under watch and could not have been doing any such thing, or so everyone assured each other. Still, 2 incidents occurred that could not be easily explained away. In March 1872, one of Nathaniel's attending physicians, a middle-aged man named Dr. Finch, was found in his office at dawn, collapsed over his desk, pulse thready. On examination, it was determined he had suffered a minor stroke. He survived, but when he recovered enough to speak days later, Dr. Finch claimed something uncanny. He said he'd been working late by lamplight, reviewing Nathaniel's files when he felt a presence behind him. He turned and, for an instant, thought he saw Nathaniel's face peering at him from the darkness of the corner. He heard a voice, or perhaps a thought not his own, whisper, "Sleep is coming for you." The next thing he knew, a sudden pain exploded in his head, and all went black. The rational consensus was that Dr. Finch simply overworked himself into a hallucination and stroke, but a few nurses exchanged fearful glances, noting how much the description matched Nathaniel and how the boy hated Dr. Finch, who had been one of the more forceful advocates for heavy drugging. The second incident was even more disturbing. A patient, a young woman suffering from what was then called hysteria, drowned in a bathtub during one of Nathaniel's first months there. She had been sedated and left briefly unattended, and it was ruled an accident, or possibly suicide. However, an orderly swore he had seen Nathaniel staring through a crack in the door as they pulled the poor woman's body from the water. This seemed impossible since Nathaniel was supposed to be confined in another ward. When questioned, the boy merely smiled faintly and said, "I heard the commotion and wanted to see. Baths are dangerous if you fall asleep, you know." The staff was so unnerved that they tightened security around him even more. Dr. Willard's notes from this period reflect his conflicted feelings. On one hand, he was a scientist, marveling at an unprecedented human phenomenon. On the other, he was a caretaker, watching a child sink further into something he struggled to comprehend. He recorded one particularly eerie conversation he had with Nathaniel during an evaluation. He asked the boy if he felt remorse for what happened to his mother and Dr. Finch and others. Nathaniel's response, "I've been thinking a lot about that. I don't feel the way people expect. I'm sorry Mother was sad and that you were hurt, but I don't feel sorry for what I did. Is that wrong? Or is it just different?" The boy spoke as if genuinely perplexed why certain actions were labeled right or wrong, when to him they were part of logical experimentation or even mercy in his mind regarding his mother. Dr. Willard wrote, "Subject displays a profound lack of emotional connection to concepts of morality. It is as though he views life from a step removed, with an analyst's eye rather than a participant's heart. I am haunted by the idea that perhaps sleep, dreaming, is what tempers our humanity. Deprived of it, Has he also been deprived of empathy? Does the endless wakefulness erode the barrier between rational thought and impulse? Modern readers might recognize this as an early grasp at the concept of psychopathy or antisocial personality, and a hypothesis that lack of the restorative, unconscious processing that sleep provides could contribute to it. But in 1872, this was uncharted territory. Despite the increasing wariness of staff, Nathaniel still outwardly behaved well enough that by the summer of 1872, he was given a bit more freedom within the secured ward. Dr. Willard stepped away briefly to attend to his regular practice back home, planning to return in a few weeks. In his absence, some of the younger attendants, lulled by Nathaniel's small stature and cooperative demeanor, became less vigilant. It was a lapse they would regret. On August 17, 1872, after nearly half a year at the asylum, Nathaniel Pierce vanished. The circumstances of his escape were a mix of clever planning on his part and unfortunate negligence on the staff's part. Reconstruction of the event determined that Nathaniel had slowly gained the trust of a night attendant by feigning interest in scripture readings. The man often read the Bible aloud to calm patients. Nathaniel would sit quietly, listening, and even asking thoughtful questions about the stories of wakefulness in the Bible, like the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus chides the disciples for falling asleep. On that night, the attendant felt comfortable enough to leave Nathaniel's room door unlocked while he went to fetch a new candle. In those few minutes, Nathaniel made his move. He had observed the change of shifts and knew that between 3 and 3:15 a.m., there was a brief window when two orderlies would both be on break, thinking the other was on watch. With a deftness that suggested he'd perhaps been practicing, Nathaniel sneaked through the dim corridors, avoiding the squeaky floorboards. He had noted them during his pacing walks. He obtained a set of keys, possibly lifted from the drowsy attendant earlier. Some theorized, though the man swore they were just misplaced. Nathaniel navigated multiple locked doors, including one through the poorly secured kitchen delivery entrance. By the time the alarm was raised at sunrise, a window was found open, with faint child-sized footprints leading away into the dew-covered grass. The boy had escaped into the wide world, under the open sky, that by now he knew far better than any ceiling. A massive search was launched. The idea of an unstable child roaming free, one with a known history of violence and cunning, set law enforcement on edge throughout Maine. Posses were formed, bloodhounds deployed. For weeks they scoured the woods, roads, and neighboring towns. There were a few tantalizing reports. A farmer who claimed a small figure stole bread from his windowsill at night. A railroad worker who spotted a boy matching Nathaniel's description stowing away in an empty freight car heading west. A lighthouse keeper's wife who awoke to a face peering in her bedroom window one midnight, only to vanish. But none of these sightings could be confirmed as Nathaniel. He had slipped away as silently as he lived by night, and the trail went cold. Nathaniel's disappearance did not end the intrigue or the fear. His story turned into legend and cautionary tale across New England in the years that followed. Some newspapers, freed from the constraints of facts, sensationalized his tale into something of a folk demon story. The Devil's Child of Maine, one paper called him, claiming he had the evil eye that could keep others from sleep or stop a heart. Parents in rural Maine would occasionally warn misbehaving children, "If you don't go to bed, Nathaniel Pierce will get you. The boy who never sleeps is out there watching." Of course, such terrifying admonitions likely did more harm than good in getting kids to sleep. Dr. Willard, devastated by the escape, spent many subsequent years quietly tracking any news or odd reports that might hint at Nathaniel's whereabouts. Mysterious occurrences dotted the map sporadically. A string of unexplained animal mutilations in upstate New York in 1873. A report from a remote logging camp in Quebec of a strange boy living feral in the woods who never slept. That one turned out to be a hoax. Later, in the 1880s, a series of sudden deaths of solitary elderly people in Pennsylvania and Ohio, in which victims were found with faces frozen in fear and doors mysteriously open. Dr. Willard pondered if Nathaniel, grown older, might have resumed what happened with Agnes Miller, frightening people to death in their sleep. But proving any of it was impossible. It was equally plausible that Nathaniel had died in the wilderness, finally succumbing to exhaustion or the elements. Yet, deep down, Dr. Willard doubted that. Nathaniel had survived so much. It was likely, the doctor thought with a shudder, that Nathaniel was still out there somewhere, adapting and continuing his peculiar existence. Catherine Pierce never fully recovered from the ordeal. In the immediate years after Nathaniel's capture and escape, she rarely left her home. The farm fell into disrepair without John or a healthy income. Neighbors helped where they could, but Catherine was a ghost of herself. The joy and song that had once sustained her were gone. At night, it was said, she kept every lamp in the house lit until dawn, as if afraid of what might be lurking in the dark if she extinguished them. Or perhaps, hoping against hope, that her boy might find his way back home like a moth to the porch light. She passed away in 1875 from what the doctor listed as consumption, tuberculosis, though some whispered she died of a broken heart and constant sleepless anxiety. Dr. Willard went on to publish an anonymized account of Nathaniel's case in a medical journal in 1876, titled, "On the Phenomenon of Prolonged Wakefulness and Moral Deviation in a Juvenile Patient." It was largely ignored or met with skepticism by the wider medical community, who found it too outlandish. However, a few forward-thinking physicians were inspired by it, planting seeds that would much later germinate into serious study of sleep disorders and even the psychological importance of dreaming. The journals and drawings collected from Nathaniel were preserved by Dr. Willard and later donated to the New England Center for Neurological Studies in Boston, though kept under restricted access due to their disturbing content. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that scholars re-examined those old records and recognized them as possibly the earliest documented case of a rare genetic disorder that would much later be known, in a different form, as fatal familial insomnia, a prion disease that strikes adults, causing them to lose the ability to sleep and eventually die. But Nathaniel's case didn't fit neatly. He had been a child, and he had survived, thrived in a twisted way, far beyond what any such patient would. To this day, no medical diagnosis fully explains Nathaniel Pierce. In 1903, an interesting footnote appeared in the Bangor Daily News. An elderly, ailing Dr. Abraham Willard had given a final interview to a young journalist about his long career. In it, he mentioned a case from decades ago that still troubled him. He spoke of Nathaniel, not by full name, and said, "I often wonder if he found peace. Perhaps somewhere, somehow, he laid down and slept at last." The doctor mused about the tantalizing mystery, whether Nathaniel's unique condition died with him, or if he perhaps started a family, passing on whatever strange trait he carried. A chilling thought. Could there be others, even now, inheriting a curse of endless wakefulness? The journalist pressed for more, sensing a story, but Dr. Willard only added, "The lesson I learned is that rest is not just for the body, but for the soul. Deprive a person of the balm of sleep, of dreams, and you may unchain something truly frightening. In nightmares, we face our fears and emerge with sanity. But what if one never dreams? Perhaps the nightmares then must come to life." It was a poetic, haunting statement that the newspaper printed under the headline, "Doctor hints at nightmare child from years past." This rekindled local legend, and for a time, folks speculated that the old tale of Nathaniel Pierce might be true after all. There were even a few reported sightings around that era, a claim that a man in his 40s with unnaturally bright eyes was seen wandering near the ruins of the Pierce farm late at night. Another, that an insomniac patient in Boston spoke of a strange orderly who never slept and vanished before dawn, though records of staff showed no such person employed. These remained unsolved footnotes. Today, the story of Nathaniel the Sleepless. Pierce lives on in dusty archives and the whispers of Maine's oldest residents. Some paranormal enthusiasts have folded it into regional lore, proposing that Nathaniel was not a medical marvel, but a sort of hybrid between human and spirit. A child of a human mother and a nocturnal demon, they say, which is why he never slept. Folklorists compare him to the legend of the Sandman in reverse. Instead of bringing sleep, he steals it away. But what do you think? Was Nathaniel Pierce simply a very sick boy who became a product of his condition and environment? Or was there something more supernatural at play, an evil awakened by the lack of sleep? Do you believe every detail of this tale? Or do you suspect some parts were exaggerated as it was retold? One thing is certain. The case of the boy who never slept forces us to confront the fragile line between fact and folklore, between the known science of the human body and the dark mysteries that science has yet to illuminate. If this story kept you awake tonight, you're not alone. It's been unsettling sleep schedules since the 19th century. Let us know in the comments what you think really happened to Nathaniel Pierce, and if you've ever heard of anything similar. We're always eager to hear your theories and personal tales. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into one of America's darkest historical mysteries. If you want more spine-chilling stories like this, remember to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Share this video with someone you know who enjoys walking the line between truth and the unknown. They might just thank you for the nightmares. And as always, until our next journey into the shadows, remember, the truth is often more terrifying than fiction. And sometimes, as in the case of Nathaniel Pierce, the two are almost impossible to tell apart. Sleep well, if you can,